I'm an Orthodox Jew. I live in the closet. I've got 2 kids and I'm married and I'm gay, and I read your book and it really helped me realize that when I'm ready to come out, there is a community out there for me. So when you get these kind of messages, it feels like it was worth all the hard work.
Welcome to Priorities, the podcast about the things in life that really matter. I'm your host, journalist and coach Lily Silverton, and each week I'll be asking a new interviewee to open up about the things that are important and unimportant to them. What takes first place in their life, what they couldn't care less about, and what they'd like to work on a little bit more. Will you agree with their priorities? Will they make you reevaluate your own? Let's find out. My guest today is author, journalist, and TEDx speaker Amelia Abraham. Amelia is the features editor at British style magazine Dazed and has written for pretty much every UK publication you could think of, including Vice, The Guardian, New Statesman, ES Magazine, ID, and Vogue. In 2019, Amelia released what was one of my books of the year, Queer Intentions, a personal journey through LGBTQ culture. In the moving, thought-provoking, but also funny book, she explores queer culture across the world, interviewing a wide range of individuals about their experiences while also weaving in her own. Amelia's knowledge, understanding, sensitivity, and brilliant way with words has led her to become one of the foremost voices in LGBT culture and politics in the UK. Welcome, Amelia. I am so thrilled and excited to have you on. I read your book, Queer Intentions, last year and absolutely loved it. It was so open and thoughtful and thought-provoking and taught me a lot as well. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. The book feels like quite a long time ago now, so it's nice to talk to people about it because it's almost a year that it's been out.
What's the response been like?
It's been really good, yeah. I haven't sort of heard a bad word about it, which is really nice. And I still kind of get messages about once a week, maybe, like quite a thoughtful message from someone who says something that just makes me cry. Like, oh, I had one last week that was like, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I live in the closet. I've got 2 kids and I'm married and I'm gay, and I read your book and it really helped me realize that when I'm ready to come out, there is a community out there for me. So when you get these kind of messages, it feels like it was worth all the hard work. So the response has been really good. And I occasionally do hear really amazing things like that.
That's a beautiful message. I wonder how they read it.
I know, I thought that. Sometimes that's probably the most sort of extreme one I've had. But, sometimes it's just like, oh, I think there are a few at Christmas, people saying, I'm with my family and they're not very accepting of me. So it was quite nice to be able to sort of sneak off and read this book and stuff like that. That's more of a usual one. The one from the Orthodox Jewish woman was a bit more kind of emotional.
It's incredible. So when did you start writing the book? How did the idea come about?
I started writing it in, 2017. And it took about a year. So I think I finished in maybe a year and a half in 2018. And I suppose it was my response to what was going on around me as a queer person. And also as a journalist who had been writing about LGBTQ plus issues for quite a while. So the book kind of brings together different thoughts I was having personally and also different articles I'd written for the places I was writing for, like Refinery 29 or Vice or The Guardian. And yeah, I guess it was my way of connecting the dots between what I perceived to be the mainstreaming of queer culture, quite a dramatic shift, both culturally and politically, in terms of the sudden increase in acceptance that we were seeing through things like the legalization of same-sex marriage or huge brands and banks suddenly clamoring to sponsor Pride, things like trans people being on the cover of magazines and walking down catwalks, or drag becoming hugely, hugely, hugely popular. It's just all these different things I'd noticed happening over the last few years all seem to be connected. And I didn't really feel like anyone had, I felt like people, and including myself, had written about this stuff, but they hadn't kind of written about it in a way that connected all the dots. So I suppose that's what made me think that it would be an interesting topic for the book.
It definitely made one. It was brilliant. How did it feel for you to be so open about your own life? Because it's a lot of you call it a personal journey through LGBTQ plus culture, and it really is very personal. There's a lot of stories that you share about yourself, both past and present, it seems, as you're writing. How did it feel to be so open about your own life and relationships?
I think good. Yeah. So as I just said, I had the book, the topic, this kind of mainstreaming and this kind of survey of the moment we're in culturally in my mind. But what actually inspired me to crack on with doing it was this relationship I had with a girl that lived in Iceland, and we broke up. And I guess after our breakup, I was thinking, maybe that was the first adult relationship where I could see myself actually getting married and having kids. But as a queer person who kind of grew up in a world where marriage wasn't possible for two women, I had all these questions about why I wanted to get married. Is it too little too late? Or is that a quote unquote straight thing to do? Or is it right to get married when not everybody around the world who's LGBT is afforded the opportunity? So a lot of the questions I had around marriage was super personal. And so that's where I started the book, because the breakup was fresh in my mind and that seemed like a good launching off point. And then I suppose also I knew that if I was going to travel around the world and meet all these queer people and ask them to tell me about their personal lives and about the things they've been through, some of them quite, upsetting and difficult, it made sense to sort of share a bit of my personal history. Just felt more fair that way. I guess. And then the other reason I want it to be personal, well, I think people relate to that more, if you put yourself in the story and you share your kind of thoughts and emotions and opinions as you're going on this journey, but also just because I personally feel there aren't that many stories out there about queer women still. And so I wanted to contribute one to the world, I guess.
I think it's really powerful the way you did it. Okay, Amelia, tell me, where is your well-being right now, this minute, on a scale of 1 to 10?
I don't know how to rank that. I would maybe say 7 today.
How come?
Well, partly because I haven't done any work yet, and I just went on a run and then exercised in the garden, and it's very sunny.
And it's lunchtime now.
Yeah, no, I should say, it's lunchtime and I've sent about 3 emails. So I'm in quite a good mood because I've just been having a nice time, really. But this is not reflective of the usual day for me. It's a kind of midweek lull. And I'm trying to be quite forgiving about not working hard as I usually might while we're all in lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're chatting to each other in week 8 of lockdown. Is that right? Week 7 or 8 of lockdown?
7 or 8.
Don't know what day it is. Don't know what time it is. No month or year. I'm going to lead us on to your first priority, actually, to talk about having not done so much work today. But you told me that your first priority is your work, so your professional life. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very lucky in that a lot of what I do for my job, not all of it, is just what I'm really interested in. And I think there are good things about that. It's a very privileged position to be in, where your job is kind of your hobby, but then that can also have complications, which we can maybe come on to, in that if your work, you just don't really stop working because you quite like the work that you do, or it's harder to have boundaries. So yeah, I guess my first priority is my work. I really love it. And I think that because I also write about queer culture so much, it's not the only thing I write about. I write about arts and culture or feminist issues or sometimes sex and relationships or health or film or other things sometimes, or music sometimes, but mostly LGBT stuff. And I guess, I guess it kind of, for me, is a topic that I'm super passionate about and super interested in. And sometimes you can, as I kind of mentioned with those messages I've had about the book, sometimes you feel like, this actually has quite a positive effect. So it can almost be quite addictive. And I would say that's probably why I put work as my first priority.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of your work is online, so you also get that instant feedback with a lot of pieces that you write. And as you said, the sort of instant messages that you can get from people like the Orthodox Jewish lady who contacted you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I guess that's why writing a book was different, because it's a bit more of a sort of slow process and a bit more of a slow response than just putting an article out there and people read it for about a day, maybe 2 days, and then it's kind of gone forever. But sadly kind of how it works. It's online forever, but also nobody will probably look at it again.
I don't think that's true. I think lots of people read old pieces that come up, the good ones that come up over and over again.
Yeah, maybe if you've done a good job, they do. I'm really interested in what I do. So I spend a lot of time reading around the topic as well, even if I'm not literally writing something.
Mm. Have you always wanted to be a journalist?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I was a teenager, I would always read the columnists in the Sunday supplements, or the big features writers in the Sunday papers that my parents would buy, and think, that's what I want to do. It just took a while to get to it. Not too long, but I worked in PR for about 1 year first.
How was that?
It was actually the best thing that could have happened in terms of working as a journalist, because I was actually working in PR for Vice. So I was in the right place to observe how editorial works there, and also to meet a lot of journalists and take journalists out for lunch, journalists that worked at other places like The Guardian, for example. And then when I eventually made the switch to editorial within Vice, it meant that I knew a lot of commissioning editors that I could then pitch later on. So it was actually really beneficial, yeah. But I know a lot of people that go the other way. They go from journalism to PR later on, I think.
Yeah, because they know exactly what they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
How has your work changed during this period of uncertainty during lockdown?
Well, I don't have a place to go to anymore. So I work part-time at a magazine called Dazed usually. And I would go there 4 days a week, which I think gives you a bit of structure and a bit more social time. And yeah, I suppose a bit more focus in terms of the hours that you work. Whereas now I do things like potter about on exercise all morning and then start working at lunchtime and panic work till like 8 p.m. to atone for my lazy morning. So I think it's a bit less structured. And also I've been furloughed, so I'm not doing my day job, but I am focusing on other projects and starting a few new projects, and also writing for the fun of it, which is something that I've rarely had a chance to do in my entire life, because, there are always bills to pay and deadlines to meet, but things have slowed down a little bit. So I'm writing in a slightly more creative way and attempting fiction for the first time ever. And just, kind of slowing down the pace a little bit.
Can we ask what your fiction is on?
I'm too embarrassed. I don't think I'm there yet. I think it must take... I'm always very impressed with people who can write fiction, because it feels like putting so much more of yourself out there. To me, it feels much more vulnerable, which is why I've perhaps avoided it. I'm a bit more insecure about it. Whereas I think I reason with journalism, it's not that exposing, because I say, I'm just writing down what happened. Or if I was reporting, or I'm just writing down what someone else said, even if it is quite personal, or even if it is, a book that sort of puts forward a point and makes an argument. I think I kind of reason it that way, but with fiction, I'm scared.
Yeah, I completely understand that. In terms of your work, aside from the book, what's maybe your favourite piece of work you've done, your favourite contribution, something that really changed the way you saw the world or changed the way you saw yourself in your work? Or maybe it just moved you?
Good question. I think that it's the work that kind of inspired the book, the type of work that kind of inspired the book, which was when I worked at Vice, I wrote quite a lot about activist movements or kind of social justice. And they were amazing, and they gave me a lot of room to explore quite difficult topics as long reads. So I wrote one about big pharma price hiking, and how pharmaceutical companies basically were kind of withholding access to PrEP for men with HIV or access to rare breast cancer drugs through price hiking, and going to these kind of activist groups and also going to their protests was really interesting to me. And then I think also I wrote another one that was a long read about the Me Too movement, but it was specifically about the ethics of naming the perpetrator of sexual assault online. And it was a really, really long article. It was about 4,000 words long, looking at alternative forms of justice and the ethics of that. So those kind of stories where they're kind of social justice stories with maybe unanswerable or difficult questions at the heart of them. I think that's kind of what inspired the book, maybe, and maybe what I find most rewarding.
And Vice is really well known for that. So it's a brilliant space within to work.
Yeah, I think so. And I had some really encouraging editors there. I wrote another one for Dazed, where I work now, which was a similar type of story and also ridiculously long, about 4,000 words long, which was about transgender prisoners and the kind of inverted commas debate about where to put certain prisoners and how you can kind of how you can self-determine your gender in prison and how easily you can move to a prison of the other gender, as well as I went to prisons and met trans prisoners and asked them, what's it like, for instance, to live as a woman in a men's prison for 30 years. And that was fascinating. So yeah, stories like that, I think, is my favourite work to do.
And just incredible to read as well. I'll put a link to a few of those in the show notes. That brings us on really well to another one of your priorities, which is activism.
Well, I try.
Have you always been engaged in activism? Have you always been quite political?
No, I think that I wasn't that political, particularly engaged. Even through university, it was maybe in my kind of, over the last few years, maybe I'm 28 now, so maybe about 24, 25. Before that, I guess I was just too busy being self-involved and going out all the time, but also maybe trying to find a job and stuff like that. I only think once you're a bit more kind of stable in yourself and what you're doing, can you, really start to think, how can I do more to help other people? Both from a kind of financial perspective and a time perspective and an emotional perspective as well. So no, I haven't always been, and I'm still probably don't do as much as I could, but I think it's interesting because the question I've had for a while is, am I doing enough? When you write about when you write about issues that are affecting people from a minority, in a way, raising awareness of these types of issues is activism, but it's also not, because I get paid to do it. So while it might be really helpful to kind of go to Stockport and meet LGBT teenagers and talk to them about the hate crimes they're experiencing, and publish an article about that in Cosmopolitan magazine, where like not many people who read the magazine might know that that's going on, or quite what the extent of hate crime in Britain is. I'm ultimately just doing my job. So it's helpful, but I don't know if it counts as activism. So I've been trying to kind of think, what more can I do over the last maybe year?
I think it does count as it. I think the two are just integrated for you.
Yeah, which is maybe it does, which is really lucky. Which makes me very privileged, I guess. And I suppose there are things that you do that you don't get paid for. Not to call out the TED Talk franchise, but you don't get paid to do a TED Talk, and it's quite a lot of work. Actually, hours and hours and hours of work, because you have to learn. Not only have to write it, and it's harder to write a speech when you're used to writing things that aren't going to be read aloud, and then learn it off by heart, which takes forever, and fills me with performance anxiety. But that felt like a good kind of activism adjacent thing to do. So basically mine was about why feminists should support transgender rights. And I think in the current climate of media transphobia, that felt like a good or helpful message to put out into the world, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also kind of hopefully was a kind of a quick shortcut for some people who weren't sure about what the arguments were, or what to think, or what to say or do when they hear transphobia. So hopefully it kind of had a practical element to it as well.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, the TEDx or TED formula is just so easy to absorb information, whereby maybe, I would and I do happily sit down and read your 4,000 word pieces. However, for some people, that's not what they have time for, or not how they work, or it's just a bit too much for them. So being able to watch it in video format is so easy and accessible.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
So what do you think of the online space for activism? What do you think of clicktivism and everything else around that? Obviously, right now with lockdown, everything is online. So your space in which you operate has changed. Everyone's spaces operate. What do you think of that right now?
I think it's a totally valid and useful form of activism if done correctly. Especially at the moment, yeah. It's amazing to see the kind of efforts that people are coming up with, and really creative stuff as well to fundraise. People doing drag shows from their home in order to fundraise for the drag performers who were on kind of precarious income at their local gay bar. Do you know what I mean? So stuff like that. I think I'm seeing really fun, creative, resourceful responses to this situation. And I'm seeing a lot of people, give up their privilege, or the bit of expendable income they have, to donate it, and I'm trying to do the same. I think it's been really comforting to see that since coronavirus happened. And I think things like, petitions work, online petitions work sometimes they don't, but they can at least be a really useful way to draw attention to an issue. And I think, letters is something I see increasingly circulating when it comes to LGBT activism. So I think that a technique that we're kind of using a lot at the moment is, if someone in the public eye, whether that be an MP or a journalist, says or does something transphobic, we will someone will write a letter, and then we'll all help to circulate it, and we'll sign it, and we'll all look over it and make sure we feel like it's an appropriate response. And then we'll get that. We'll not only send that to them, we'll get it published in the press. And I think that that's been quite effective in holding people accountable. I mean, there was a Guardian columnist who wrote an article that was, we all perceived to be quite transphobic. And so we wrote an open letter, and we had cis feminist people of note sign that letter, and that got published, and then there was a sort of semi-apology a week later. So I think that technique's really working for us at the moment, and that can all be done over the internet.
Much easier to call people out quickly.
Yeah, and just get the ball rolling really quickly. You just create a Google Doc, and then you share it with 10 people you trust, and then they share it with 10 people they trust to sign it, and you can get the whole thing together within a day. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, it is absolutely staggering. I work quite a lot with Extinction Rebellion, and it's similar with them, where we sort of write letters and then all have a look over it and then send it out. And that collaboration element and the quickness, as you say, of it can be really motivating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps within kind of LGBTQ plus activism, what we are lacking is, and it's obviously impossible at the moment because we can't go outside, but I think in general, I think that we're not quite actually as good at sort of having physical protests or getting out there and getting our message heard collectively in a physical way, in the way that maybe, climate change activists do. So I think that's something to think about going forwards, because obviously we have Pride, but that feels quite apolitical to me these days. Although I will say, actually, was it last year, a group of people organised a kind of anti-corporate Pride event close by where main Pride happens. And I went to that, and it was amazing. There were about 2,000 people, and we all gathered in a park, and there were loads of political speeches about LGBT homelessness or about trans rights, for instance. And then we kind of marched behind the main parade, and everyone was chanting, "We're here, we're queer, we are not going shopping," which was a response to the kind of, the pink washing that happens around Pride, and just the really overwhelming presence of brand logos, which sort of makes me feel strange inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something you talk about quite a lot in the book with relation to Pride, sort of across Europe, in Amsterdam and Berlin.
Yeah, I tried to get to the bottom of it. I think sponsorship's necessary to make Pride happen, but I don't think it needs to be the sort of big branding opportunity that it is.
Yeah. Nutrition is a priority for me, and I know that the more plants I eat, the better I feel. However, with a busy life, I, like you I'm sure, don't always manage to get my daily quota of greens. So I'm very happy that this season of Priorities is sponsored by Foga, a new brand that makes plant shakes, pre-portioned blends of freeze-dried fruit and veg that you simply shake up with water or milk to create a restaurant-standard smoothie at home. I'm not really into protein shakes or powders. However, these are genuinely amazing. They're so easy and delicious. Right now, I'm digging the ginger and greens combination, and my daughter is a big fan of berries and cinnamon. They contain 0 extra sugars or chemicals. Through freeze drying, have all the nutrients locked in, and they're whole plant, meaning they have all the fiber of fresh fruit and veg. It's really the lazy person's dream. If you're looking to easily and affordably prioritize your nourishment, then I'd love to find out if you enjoy Foga as much as I do. They're offering £5 off your first box with the code PRIORITIES. Check them out on www.foga.co. That's Foga. Thank you to Foga. I love sleep. Seriously, it's one of my biggest priorities, and I'm a different and much improved person when I get my full 8 hours. So I'm incredibly excited that this season of Priorities is sponsored by Sleep Siren, an independent lifestyle brand fueled by a passion for health, wellness, and great sleep. Sleep Siren brings together science, education, and luxurious products to offer meaningful support to busy people who could sleep a little or a lot better. As the mother of a toddler and having suffered from insomnia on and off my entire life, I know firsthand how helpful Sleep Siren can be at identifying and covering your sleep needs. Whether you're looking to read an expert article on the latest sleep science, treat yourself to some insanely soft silk pajamas, or simply find a luxurious eye mask, Sleep Siren have everything you need to sleep well tonight. If you would like to improve your sleep, I'd love for you to have the same experience as me with Sleep Siren. So they're offering 20% off with the code PRIORITY20. Check them out on www.sleepsiren.com. Thank you to Sleep Siren. All right, I'm going to move on to your third priority, which, as we've already discussed slightly off recording, we're not sure what to call it. So it was talking about the things that you do for yourself that are really important for your sense of well-being. So obviously self-care does pop up, but neither of us are particularly fond of that. And then we looked at me time, which again, not really huge fans of. You thought of anything else?
No, I don't think I've got a better suggestion. I think the reason I don't like self-care is, because it kind of feels like a term that's been appropriated from Audre Lorde and now kind of is used by brands that describe, doing a £100 face mask or something. So it just feels a bit strange to me sometimes. But then it is actually also useful because it does just sum it up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And me time makes me think of like reading a romantic novel and eating chocolate in the bath, which there's actually nothing wrong with. But I'm not sure that that term kind of describes what I'm talking about either. And I guess what I'm really talking about is just mundane tasks, like but that you also get enjoyment from, like exercising, having a bath, cooking a meal that takes like an hour to prepare. And I think it's quite interesting that we wouldn't even really, I think that 50 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe we wouldn't even be talking about those things in the realm of me time or self-care or whatever the term is. I think that it's interesting that we do, or, acts of well-being. I think it's really interesting that we consider these quite sort of banal, nice things. Like well-being practices.
And as you say, with the £100 face masks, there's also so much co-opting by brands and by money as well. So well-being or self-care being this sort of moneyed idea. There was a really good piece in The Cut about that. I don't know if you saw it during lockdown.
No, I'll go and read it. I absolutely love The Cut. I love reading that stuff. But they also do hilarious profiles of a lot of people that run the kind of most expensive, wackiest wellness kind of new classes or whatever it is. And I actually quite enjoy reading those because I find the tone in The Cut, it's like they're not kind of taking the mick, but they're not endorsing it either. There's this clever balance in the way they present it.
Yeah, agreed. I'll link to that piece in the show notes as well. So exercising, reading, cooking for you, those are the things that are important?
I think so. I'm not really a yoga person. Going to exercise classes with other people gives me like social anxiety. So I've actually been quite enjoying for the first time getting into doing classes over lockdown at home because I'm the only person there and it's all digital. And I realized that's what I like that. But yeah, I think the reason that we talk about these quite ordinary things now as kind of self-care practices is linked to how much, we work. And I think it links to what I mentioned earlier, which is not maybe having a clear boundary between hobby, activism and work for me. So there's not fixed hours where I go into an office and then I leave that office behind and I'm not really super interested in my job, so I try not to think about it after work or on the weekend. I work at some point most weekends, which is maybe bad. And I think that's for the love of it, but also sometimes for economic reasons. And I think also just trying to do too much and being bad at saying no to things. But I think that kind of affects your economy of time, and then really simple things that maybe shouldn't even be considered as a kind of self-care becomes self-care. I think that's why it happens.
Yeah, the mundane. I think we're just always available and always on. And so doing something like exercising or reading or cooking, you have to be a bit focused. It's obviously this idea of like something where you can be mindful and draw your attention away from everything else. And of course, you can read a book and look at your phone at the same time, but you can't do that for very long. You can't get very far in the book. And same with cooking or exercising. You've got to bring your full attention to it. So it's become this way in which we have this act of self-care that we need because we're not doing it the rest of the time.
Completely. And it's embarrassing, but also I don't blame myself. But the way that it's exactly as you say, it's the attention economy, and it's the kind of gamification of technology so that you kind of can't put it down, and you have your checking cycles. And especially at the moment, when we're not able to have face-to-face time with people, we become really dependent on social media and other forms of communication on our phones and on our laptops, and it becomes even harder to stop. And I think our screen time's gone up a lot. And so, I mean, yeah, like I said, it's a bit embarrassing to admit, but the only place I can really truly read for any sustained amount of time without getting distracted or my mind wandering is in the bath, because I don't have my phone and there's nowhere to go or nothing. my
Amelia, I'm exactly the same. It's the only time that I read novels these days.
Yeah, my flatmate would just sit in the garden or the living room and read a book, and I'm like, how do you do that? It's terrible.
What are you reading at the moment?
Well, this might be my other problem. I always read 3 things at once. I'm reading a Chelsea Girls by Eileen Miles, which I'm rereading, which she's a kind of American lesbian poet, and this is a kind of novel about her kind of growing up period. So it's sort of set where she's from, and then in sort of 70s New York. And it's about like drug taking and women and whatnot. What I mentioned about how I feel like there aren't many lesbian stories in the world, this is one of the kind of famous lesbian novels. So that's Chelsea Girls. Then I'm reading Pisces by Melissa Broder, which is a novel, I think from last year, about a woman's dating life and kind of all the kind of hapless and depressing sex she has. And then I'm reading a book called Immodest Acts, which is a really niche history book about a rumoured lesbian nun from the 16th century. quite a strange mixture of things, I guess, but also quite on brand for me.
This mixture of your priorities in a book format.
Yeah, I just read 3 Women by Lisa Tadeo as well, which I hadn't read, and I loved it.
Oh, it's staggering. It's such a good book.
Really stayed in my head for the last 2 weeks since I finished.
Yeah, that and the Bernardito Evaristo book, Girl, Woman, Other.
Yeah, I might read that next, actually. That's next on the list. And Rachel Kushner, The Mars Room, is one of the best things I've read recently. I absolutely loved that. Would really recommend.
Brilliant. I'll include all these in the show notes. Okay, so what's not a priority for you?
Yeah, quite a lot of things. I don't know. I don't really know where to start with that one. I guess I think I mentioned that I'm just trying not to worry too much about the future at the moment, because I think that's really overwhelming given what's going on. And we don't know what's going to be possible when. So I'm just trying not to, I'm not trying to worry too much about the future or the past. I don't know if it's true, but someone told me you're happiest when you think most in the present. Mm-hmm. That might be fake news.
No,
but I think it feels true.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. All of our concerns, all of our worries and stresses are generally, if you really think about it for a minute, either about what's happened in the past and we're stuck on it, stuck on maybe something we said or did or we weren't happy with, or concerned about the future, anxiety about something that might happen, or fearful of something or worried. If you actually think about the present at this very second, there's nothing that we can worry about or think about for most people, providing your basic needs are met.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think something I do a lot is worry about what the outcome of every decision I make will be in a way that's quite stifling, and you end up not really making a decision. Or just saying yes in case you miss out. And there's a lot of positives to being a yes person, but there's also a lot of negatives to it. So just trying to take each day as it comes at the moment, and not worry about the future or get too nostalgic about the past, because I think that would make me feel a bit sad. While our kind of movements and social time and the other possibilities are so limited.
Yeah, and as you say, it is also something that you actively need to do to make it not a priority, to sort of stop worrying, because the brain so naturally goes there.
Yeah, it does. It's natural to think, how long is this going to go on for? What's the world going to be like after? When am I going to be able to do X, Y, Z? When will I be able to see my family? When will I be able to date again? All these questions are really overwhelming, and because they're kind of unknown entities. Although the future is always to some extent an unknown entity, but I think that's heightened at the minute. So I'm just trying to actively avoid those type of thoughts by really just focusing on what am I going to do today, and not really thinking past today.
Well, I would say this as a meditation teacher, but meditation helps with that, because it's all about being in the present and not allowing yourself to think too much about the future or the past. But it sounds like you got it down. You talked about being a yes person. So that brings me on to an area of your life that you'd like to prioritize more. And you said that you'd like to not spread yourself so thinly, or try to do so many things.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I quite often sort of joke that it's the Gemini trait or tendency to be quite indecisive, or perhaps a little bit fickle, or kind of seek out this constant stimulation, or always trying to start new things without perhaps finishing the last one, or taking on extra things, which then don't allow me to give my full attention to what I'm supposed to be doing. So maybe just saying yes to things too much, which, as I mentioned, is good, because it opens up new life experiences and opportunities. But I think it can just also mean you spread yourself too thin. And that, I mean that within friendships and relationships and working life.
Which, as you say, is so blurred as well, with always being available on with our phones. Why do you think you do it? Why do you think that you say yes to everything?
Partly fear of missing out, I guess. Like I said, I get quite stifled by having to make decisions. In case, what will I miss? Yeah, what will I miss out on, or what might happen if I say no? So I say yes just to see, and then suddenly I've said yes to too many things. And I think also, a bit of when a lot of your income is kind of freelance, it gives you this mindset of, well, I better say yes to that, because I don't know when I might get asked again, or when the next job is coming, even though it usually will come. So I think there's a bit of that too.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that.
And I think then the third reason is sort of on a slightly more emotional level. I don't think I really like putting all of my eggs in one basket in case they break. So yeah, I think that then kind of starts to apply across the board. And sometimes that can be a smart decision, because, you might put all your time and energy into, something. I'm trying to develop a TV show, for example. And if that was the only thing I was doing, the fact that it was taking a year and that it could go wrong at any time, it probably wouldn't end well. But because I'm trying to work at Dazed, work in TV, try writing fiction, work on a second book, do the events for the first book, and freelance, if one thing goes wrong, there's still kind of four things left. But that also just leaves you feeling completely frazzled and like your head's in too many places. And I think a lot of people in the creative industries have a kind of similar situation. So yeah, just trying not to put all my eggs in one basket. But that can be a catch-22, because if you do put all your eggs in one basket, then, you know, things might pay off better, or the end result might be a little bit more special because you'll have given it your all. So I think I'm still working that one out.
I always think, maybe because I work very much in that way as well, with so many projects on the go, what I kind of think about it is like, you know, on a volume dial. So you like turn one dial down at that point in life, so just not doing quite as much on that, but it's still there, and turn the other one up that you really need to put your energy into and work into. And that way, you know that you've got to say no a little bit more often for that area, or for that, maybe if it's freelance work, if you're focusing on the TV, or if it's, you know, commitments for the book, in terms of publicity, knowing that maybe you need to say no to some things in order to have a little bit more energy to focus on one area, and then you can dial other things up at various points.
Yeah, that's a lot more of a kind of tactical and controlled way of looking at it than, I guess, that classic thing that I think always does feel true, which is that, you know, that kind of cliche of, oh, well, once one area of your life is going right, another one will go wrong, which I think does tend to happen. But maybe it just feels like that.
I think it can feel like that. Again, as you said, if you feel like you're spreading it too thinly. So what steps do you think that you can make now, easy steps, in order to manage your time a little bit better and feel less thinly spread over your life?
I think having a limit in the number of kind of concurrent work projects that are allowed to happen is helpful. Maybe 5 feels like a reasonable number, and then, you know, not letting myself go beyond that. And I think just remembering that the things that we talked about that constitute self-care are really important to make time for, because your kind of work improves if you're kind to yourself, and you don't force yourself to work literally every minute of every day and every weekend, and that having time off will ultimately make your work better. I guess that's something I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, completely. I think it's so much. I mean, I'm a bit of a workaholic myself, so I'm with you on that one. But it's so much in the downtime that some of the best creative ideas can come, because you've actually got the space for them.
100%. I mean, 2 things on that. One is that I think it is a little bit harder when we're in lockdown, because because or just if you work from home generally, because you have to be really disciplined about taking an hour for lunch or stopping at 6 p.m., which is the structure I mentioned that an office gives you, and you don't have that. So I think just remembering to do that is really, really helpful. And you're completely right. The best ideas do come when you're sort of just, I mean, I feel like my best ideas always come when I'm on holiday, weirdly, because it's fine a time to think in a more kind of creative way.
Yeah, totally. I have the same experience. So we need to just do a little bit less sometimes. Actually
go on holiday more when we're allowed.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of more, tell us about the projects you're working on right now. You talked about the TV show. Is it a show or is it a series?
Well, ideally, it is this TV show and a series. It's a kind of adaptation of Queer Intentions, the book, my last book, which you're very kind about, kind of trying to turn it into a fictional drama about a contemporary group of queer friends that also looks back at LGBT history. But television is slow, so that's just kind of bubbling away over there. And I'm working on a second book for Penguin, which is an anthology about LGBTQ plus rights around the world, and sort of a manifesto for what we need to do to make life better for LGBT people, what work there still is to be done. So that's really exciting. And I can't really say who's in it yet, but there are a few very well-known LGBT people and also some grassroots activists that I've come across in my own work who have really amazing stories and really sometimes quite upsetting stories or really inspiring stories. And everyone's sort of talking about the thing that they changed to make life better for LGBT people.
Sounds great. Well, as you know, I loved your first book, so I'll be pre-ordering that. Do you know when it's coming out yet?
I do. And that's when everyone gets around to actually sending me their essays. No, it's in June 2021.
All right. Well, we'll look out for it then.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. And thank you for talking to me. It's been I think it's been very helpful in getting my thoughts aligned at this weird time.
Good to hear. I love chatting to you and hearing about all your priorities and everything that's going on. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of Priorities, I'd really appreciate it if you could make it your priority today to hit subscribe and also rate and review, as this helps other people find it. Need a little incentive? Every month, I offer one free 60-minute online coaching session to a listener. All you have to do is hit subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and then email a screenshot of your review to prioritiespodcast@gmail.com. You'll then be added into the ballot for a free one-to-one coaching session with me, in which we will help align the priorities of your life. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.